Hey guys, it's Dasha. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video, which is the mid-year book freakout tag 2024 edition. We all know how this one works by now. It is a booktube staple, so let's get right into it. I have read only 22 books so far this year, which for me is a little bit low, and I've only had one 5-star book. So the first question, which is what is the best book I've read so far this year, was kind of hard to answer because I didn't want to use repeats for subsequent questions. So if I had to pick probably the best book I've read so far, it's got to be Empire of Pain by Patrick Radcliffe. This is a nonfiction book about the Sackler family who took over Purdue Pharma and created OxyContin, which then caused an incredible opioid epidemic across the US and many other parts of the world. This is very much a family saga, like a family drama, and I absolutely loved every minute of it. I've read Patrick Radcliffe before. His book Say Nothing, which is about the IRA, is one of my favorite nonfiction books of all time, one of my favorite books of all time. It's just so well written, so well researched. I love the way he tells stories, and this book was no exception. He just has this way of pulling you into a story, even when you think details don't matter or you don't really care to read about certain people or events. He makes you care, and it's just so fascinating to watch him tackle such a different topic from the IRA with such ease and grace, and the way he managed to insert a few other discussions in there while also keeping it kind of lighter on like the family drama and poking fun at some of the people involved. It's just phenomenal. I would highly recommend this if you don't think you like nonfiction, because this is just one of those books that's so well written that it gets you really into it. It seems massive, it's not that big, it flies by, and it's just so entertaining. The next question is the best sequel, and that's where my only 5-star read of the year comes in, and that is The Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. This is the third book in the First Law trilogy, which opens up Joe Abercrombie's First Law universe. You're basically following a few different characters who are just trying to survive in this world as war starts to kind of rumble and break out. Of course, there's magical objects and quests and stuff, but it's really about the characters, and that's what made me fall so hard for this series and what made this conclusion to the trilogy so spectacular. The first 2 books in the series are quite slow because you're getting a lot of setup, especially the first one. I could see the potential, but I was really not vibing with it that hard because I could kind of tell that we were more setting up for the shape of things to come. And while this was good and we finally got some action, it really like hit the fan in this book, and it made it just so enjoyable to read all the setup that we'd just gone through. Everything felt like it was finally paying off. I really enjoyed the arcs that our characters went on. I love that none of these characters are good people, but that makes it kind of more enjoyable in the end, because you don't really know whether you want to root for them or not, but you want to see what happens to them. You want them to kind of succeed, even though one is a literal torturer and one kind of goes into like a blackout frenzy killer mode and kills people sometimes. You're kind of still rooting for them. I really enjoyed this. I like what Joe Abercrombie's doing with his characters and his tone and his writing. I really quite enjoyed it. I can't wait to continue with this world. Forgot to grab some stuff for the next question, but the next question is a new release I haven't read yet that I wanted to. And I have not yet picked up the 3rd book in this series, but I have the first 2, and that's the Between Earth and Sky series by Rebecca Roanhorse. So first book was Black Sun, then Fevered Star, which I found a little middle book syndrome-y. And now the new book, Mirrored Heavens, is out. It came out at the beginning of June, and I kind of didn't get around to it. That is my own fault. It's been super busy, it's been super hectic, but I am looking forward to it. Ray and I were supposed to buddy read it, but then we got carried away with separate things. So I'm hoping sometime soon we can both get our hands on it and read it together to kind of conclude the trilogy, because it's a really good series. You're following, again, a few different characters in this pre-Columbian South America inspired world, and it's got these really interesting characters, like a guy who is becoming a ancient blind crow god, and a priestess who's investigating some like conspiracy, and there's just and a like badass mermaid. Like, it's really cool. There's great characters, beautiful writing, and like a really interesting world. The second book was just kind of not as good as the first, but I'm hoping that Mirrored Heavens will bring it back to that greatness of the first book. I just haven't read it yet, and that's entirely on me. The next question is the most anticipated release for the second half of the year. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know a single book coming out from like now onwards, so I'm gonna go ahead and skip this because I've been focused more on backlist anyways lately. I've been really trying to get through my own TBR and not really buying too many new books. If you've watched my TBR game, you'll know that I can't really buy books until I get to the end of the board, which is soon. When I do my next TBR, I will be at the end of the board and then I can treat myself to a little book haul. But so far I'm trying to not buy books, and that includes just kind of focusing on reading backlists. So I haven't looked at anything coming out in the rest of the year. If there's something that you're excited for, let me know, because I am always looking to add things to my TBR even though I shouldn't. So if there's something that you think is really, really cool that you're really hyped for, let me know in the comments. The next question is, what is the biggest disappointment so far for me this year? And that's gotta be Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. I've had a few disappointing books. There's some that I've DNF'd that I really expected to enjoy, but this one was just the biggest disappointment for me because the way people talk about it versus what I got was just quite unexpected. So this is a modern classic. I have read James Baldwin before, by the way. That's why it's so disappointing as well. I read The Fire Next Time and I absolutely loved it. And while the writing in here was up to that standard, there's just other things I didn't like. So yes, this is a modern classic. It is about a gay man living in Paris who's struggling a lot with his sexuality and kind of the struggle of like being seen and living his life. And while those themes were present and there was some interesting things for me to sink my teeth into, I was very unpleasantly surprised at the misogyny in this that just ran so rampant, and I'd never heard anyone talk about it. I did get a comment when I talked about this on TikTok that a lot of it could be coming from like internalized misogyny that gay men might experience, but I found that to me, while it is a valid point, and I'm sure that's something that people do experience, it just didn't quite justify the kind of vile things that were being said about women. So I was just kind of frustrated reading this. I didn't really enjoy that element of it, and it was just kind of a slow go and like deeply unlikable characters, but not even to a point where you could try to sympathize with them and see where they're coming from. It just felt truly like you were rooting against them, and that's not something that you really want in such a character-focused story. So this was just a massive miss for me. I'm really, really disappointed because I really thought I was just gonna love this based on The Fire Next Time. I will read more Baldwin. This might just be a case of this one didn't work for me, but it definitely was disappointing. On to a more positive note, the next question is the biggest surprise. And if you watched my most recent was it? It wasn't my most recent, it was my May TBR, I believe. And I had a random Instagram pick and I ended up picking up The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera. And while I had heard of this book before, it wasn't on my immediate radar, and I ended up loving this so much. This is a bit of a character study, a bit of a philosophical work. You're following a couple of people, mainly a couple. The man is this massive philanderer, and while he really loves the woman that he ends up marrying, he's still a big womanizer. He loves sleeping around, and it's causing a lot of strain between them. And it's just a bit of like a look into their psyche and the psyche of a few people around them. But it's also work, like I said, of philosophy. There's a little bit of history. The author is Czech and was writing about the communist occupation of Prague, and I imagine the Czech Republic. I guess back then it was Czechoslovakia as a whole. So it was really interesting to kind of get that and trying to piece together why that was such a big part of this book. And this is definitely a book, like I will have to read this again because I'm not sure I fully got everything in it, but from the first few pages I absolutely loved it. There was quotes in here that were making me like stop and catch my breath. I knew after reading like 2 pages from the ebook that I had to go pick up a physical copy because I just absolutely loved it. And literally the first like few pages, I had a ton of notes and a ton of things that kind of stood out to me. And while this was very much setting up kind of the themes for later in the book, there's definitely not that much to like underline and enjoy throughout all of it. It was a little slow towards the kind of middle latter part. The end just brought it so full circle for me. I really loved how the themes were portrayed by the end, and I loved it so much, and it was just such a surprise because it was not on my shelves and it was a random pick for my TBR game. So I'm so glad that that ended up working for me. If you have not read this and you think it kind of sounds interesting, definitely pick it up. The next question is new favorite author, and I think if we're going with an author that I like fully discovered this year, that would definitely be Joe Abercrombie. Like I said, I really enjoyed this trilogy. I thought it was just excellent, almost from start to finish, even though the first book was kind of slow. I did also read my second Patrick Radcliffe this year, so I don't know if that really counts as like a new favorite because I'd read him prior, but I'd only read 1 book, so it felt kind of silly to call him a favorite. But I think with this book, I can solidly say that he is a favorite author and probably an auto-buy author. I think he only has 1 more book out, Rogues, that I will give a try. But so far, I've loved what he's been doing. The next question is new favorite character, and not to bring him back up again, but Joe Abercrombie's characters I quite enjoyed, specifically Logan Ninefingers. He's just got like a little provincial charm about him that I quite enjoyed. Everyone loves Glokta. Glokta's misanthropy, is that how you pronounce it? Glokta's a misanthrope, and like at some point it gets a little tiring. So he's not like what I would say a favorite as compared to Logan, but I mean his characters are just absolutely phenomenal. The next question is a book that made me cry, and I absolutely have to go with Our Bodies, Their Battlefields by Christina Lamb. This was a gift from Ray, and it was one of the most difficult things I've ever read in my life. So this was Christina Lamb, who's a investigative journalist. She basically talked to a bunch of women who'd experienced rape during times of war and kind of explored the idea of rape being used as a weapon of war and giving light to those women and their experiences. And it's the most heartbreaking thing. It is the most difficult thing I think I have ever read. It was one of those things where reading it, I was wondering why I kept reading it, because I'm not someone who enjoys like the idea of like torture porn or watching other people be in misery to make myself feel better. I just felt like it was really important to listen to these women and read their stories and see what they had gone through. But it was just incredibly difficult, and I was definitely crying multiple times because it's just the most heartbreaking thing, and the way Christina Lamb just allows these women to have their time and their space to process these things and discuss them with her in a way that feels very respectful, not like she's feeding off that energy. It was just really, really heartbreaking, just absolutely horrific. I couldn't in good conscience recommend you this book because it is so hard to read, but for me it felt really, really important to just remind myself why I'm a feminist. A book that made me happy, I would definitely have to say, not only just because I finally finished it, but just because it was such a good read, and that's The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Everybody knows this. This is the epic revenge story, and it is so phenomenal. Specifically, what made me happy about it is kind of the wit and the dialogue and the humor and the kind of campiness of it. Like, there's some really, really fun moments. I really enjoyed a lot of the dialogue and the kind of humor that shone through this. This was not a book that overall makes you happy. There's some really sad moments. I mean, it's full of drama and death and betrayal and heartbreak and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of this just made me really happy. And it also just, like on a more meta level, it made me happy realizing how classics do still have that power to like make people hundreds of years later happy, and that we can still relate to it. And there's things that are so universal about the human experience that we can find joy in classics that are hundreds of years old. It was just so good. It was so good. This is such, despite the size, such an accessible classic. Like, I would absolutely recommend it to everyone because it's just so good, and it made me so happy, and it also made me sad, but it made me really, really happy. It's so good. The next question is the best book to movie adaptation that I've seen, and I normally never answer this one because I don't watch movies. However, I made a goal this year for myself that I would watch more movies, and I have been. So I can safely say I think my favorite book to movie adaptation I've watched this year has been V for Vendetta. This was so good. I don't know how to talk about movies too much, but obviously everyone's kind of been made aware, I think, of V for Vendetta, who's like a vigilante working to take down a fascist government in like a future Britain. And that's where the famous line, like, "You can kill the man, but not the idea," comes from, and just that kind of political violence and the question of, is it ever okay to commit acts of political violence? And I loved how it was explored. I loved how the movie looked. I know it's technically a superhero movie, but it doesn't really feel like it. Like, there's something a bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? There's something a bit more raw and a bit more personal to it than just like good versus evil like you do tend to see in superhero movies. Like, this definitely felt like there was a bit more to dig into, and I really, really enjoyed that. I'd say in close second, Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Listen, it's just fun, and I've had Black Sheep, Brie Larson's version, in my head for the last like 3 months ever since watching it. Is it like the best movie I've ever seen? No. And I also watched one of the shitty endings. I've heard there's 3 endings. I watched one of the bad ones. I do not like that ending. I think it is counterintuitive to the whole point of the movie, but I do still like the movie, and I like how horrifically Canadian it feels sometimes. Them going for pizza caused me actual war flashbacks. I loved it. V for Vendetta was definitely like a better movie, but Scott Pilgrim just now has a very special place in my heart. The final question is, what is my favorite video of mine that I posted this year? And because I've not been posting much, I didn't have a lot to choose from, but I'm definitely proud of the rewriting Fourth Wing video, just because I spent a lot of time in the script and actually like thinking of things like that took hours and hours and hours to script. And it also feels like I turned a negative experience, which was reading the book, into a bit of a more positive one, which was kind of flexing my creative muscles and working on the rewriting. So I'm glad that I did that video. I am really happy with how it turned out. I'm proud of myself. And if you haven't seen it, it will be linked in the cards, of course. But basically, I just took things that I did not love about the like world and some of the fantasy stuff of Fourth Wing, and I kind of thought about how I would rewrite it if I were to rewrite it. I didn't want to change too much. Obviously, War College with dragons and enemies to lovers, I'm not going to touch that. But there's some things that really bothered me. So I'm really proud of how that video turned out. That was it. Thank you so much for listening. Let me know what is the best and or the worst book you've read so far this year. I have all my social media linked down below. You guys can come talk to me there. Other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!